On that dark night, I was sitting on the swing in the park. Suddenly, I heard a sound that made my heart stop. The swing next to me started moving on its own. I decided to run toward the exit, but I heard a child's voice. "Why are you running?" I turned around quickly. That's when I realized the terrifying truth. This isn't a nightmare. They are really here. My name is Nicholas. I am 35 years old, and I work as a graphic designer for a major company. My life was fairly ordinary until that night that changed everything. I am a rational person. I don't believe in superstitions or ghosts. But what happened to me in that old park made me believe that there is another world we cannot explain. Let me tell you what happened. But be warned, this story is not for the faint of heart. The old park, located at the edge of the neighborhood, was my favorite place to escape the pressures of life. Ever since I was a child, I found solace there, especially at night when the air was calm and refreshing. The park was large, filled with tall trees that cast shadows over the narrow paths. Scattered among them were old swings that creaked under the weight of the wind. I visited it almost every night, wandering among the trees, sitting on one of the swings, and gazing at the stars that seemed to shine brighter in that place. But that night, everything changed. It was an ordinary night, or so it seemed at first. I had finished working late at the office and felt the need for some fresh air. I headed to the park as I usually did, and by the time I arrived, it was past midnight. The sky was overcast, and the only light came from the faint glow of the park's lampposts. The wind was howling, scattering dry leaves in every direction. I walked slowly toward the swings, which seemed to be waiting for me. I sat on one and began to swing gently, trying to relax and reflect on my long day. But suddenly, I noticed something strange. One swing, the one on the far right, was moving on its own. At first, I thought it was the wind, but I soon realized the movement was rhythmic, as if someone was sitting on it and swinging. I stopped swinging and stared at that swing. It was moving slowly at first, but then began to pick up speed. There was no one around me, not even a sound to explain it. Cold sweat dripped down my forehead and my heart began to race. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, or perhaps the effect of exhaustion. But something inside me told me that something was wrong. I decided to investigate. I stood up from the swing I was sitting on and slowly approached the moving swing. With each step, its speed increased until it began to make a disturbing creaking sound, as if groaning under the strain of its rapid movement. I got close to it, and suddenly, it stopped. The swing was completely still, as if it had never moved at all. I looked around, but found nothing unusual. I felt a little relieved and decided to head home, but as I turned, I heard a faint whisper in my ear. "Don't go." The voice was as cold as ice, as if it came from a very distant place. I froze in place and began to tremble. I tried to control myself, but fear took over. I slowly turned and looked behind me. The swing was still motionless, but I noticed something strange. There were small footprints on the ground, as if a child had been standing there. I decided to run. I hurried toward the exit. But I heard another voice, this time louder. "Why are you running?" I turned again and saw a shadow moving between the trees. The shadow was small, like that of a child, but it was moving quickly, as if chasing me. I started running as fast as I could. but the shadow kept following me, as if it knew every step I would take. I reached the park gate, but it was closed. I didn't know how that happened, as the gate was always open. I tried to open it, but it was locked tight. I heard laughter behind me, high-pitched laughter like that of a child, but it was sinister, as if it was enjoying my terror. I turned again and saw the shadow approaching me. This time, it was closer than I could have imagined. I could see its details, even though it was just a shadow. It was wearing a small hat, and its hands were stretched toward me as if it wanted to grab me. I felt paralyzed, as if something was holding me in place. Suddenly, I heard another voice, this time a woman's, "Stay away from my son!" I looked toward the source of the voice and saw a woman standing at the entrance of the park. She was wearing a long white dress, and her black hair was flying in the wind. She looked at me with eyes full of anger, as if I had disturbed her. I tried to say something, but my voice was choked. The woman pointed at the shadow and said, "This is our place. Leave us alone." Then she disappeared, as if she had been an illusion, but the shadow also vanished, as if it had never existed. The gate suddenly opened, as if something holding it had let go. I rushed out and didn't look back. I reached home, slammed the door shut, and began to tremble like a leaf in the wind. I tried to calm down, but the images kept racing through my mind. The woman, the shadow, the swing that moved on its own. Everything felt like part of a nightmare. The next morning, I decided to check the park again. Maybe everything that happened was just my imagination, or perhaps I was more tired than I realized. I went to the park in broad daylight, and it seemed completely normal. The swings were still, and the trees swayed gently in the breeze. But when I reached the swing that had moved the night before, I noticed something strange. There was a small plaque on the ground next to the swing. I approached it and read what was written. "Here lies the spirit of an innocent child who died in this place in 1987. For a moment, I felt as if the entire world had turned colder. 1987. That was before I was born. But something made me freeze. This plaque hadn't been there the night before. I was sure of it. I visited this park almost daily and knew every inch of it. How could a plaque like this appear out of nowhere? I bent down to touch the plaque. But as I got closer, I noticed the writing began to fade before my eyes, as if it had never been there. Before I could think of a logical explanation, I heard a faint, childlike voice whisper behind me, "Did you read my message?" I turned quickly, but there was no one there, only the swings, which began to move on their own. I decided to ask some of the older neighbors about the park. After some searching, I found an elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years. When I asked her about the park, she looked at me with sad eyes and said, "There was a tragic incident in that park. A young child was playing on the swing, lost control, and fell on his head. He died instantly." Since that day, the park has become a strange place, especially at night. I asked her about the woman I had seen, and she said that was the child's mother. She died a few years later, and it was said that she would visit the park every night, searching for her son. I felt terror creeping into my heart again. Everything I had seen that night was real. The child's spirit, the mother trying to protect him. It was all part of a tragedy that had happened many years ago. A few days after the incident, I began to notice strange things in my house. Doors would open and close on their own. And I would hear faint footsteps at night, as if a child was running in the hallways. One night, I woke up to the sound of a child's laughter coming from the living room. When I went to check, there was a message written on the floor in childish handwriting. "I'm here. Come play with me." But it didn't stop there. In the following days, I began to see the small shadow in the corners of my eyes, appearing suddenly and disappearing. One night, I was working on a graphic design in my room when I suddenly heard a scratching sound on the window. When I turned, I saw the face of a small child staring at me through the glass, his eyes wide and dark, with a sinister smile on his lips. I screamed at the top of my lungs in fear. Suddenly, the face disappeared, but I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, I found strange drawings on my desk. They were childish sketches of swings and trees with a picture of a man running in the middle. Under the drawing, it said, "You can't escape." I began to feel suffocated, as if something was slowly choking me. Even at work, I would hear faint whispers coming from the corners of the room, as if the child's spirit was following me wherever I went. My colleagues noticed the change in me, but I couldn't explain what was happening. How could I tell them I was being haunted by the spirit of a dead child? One night, I decided to confront it. I returned to the park, trying to find an explanation or a way to end this nightmare. But when I arrived, the park was closed and the gate was locked tight. I heard a faint laugh coming from inside, and then I saw the small shadow standing behind the gate, waving at me, as if inviting me in. "Come play with me," the voice whispered again. But this time I couldn't move. I felt trapped between two worlds, the world of the living and the world of the dead. I knew the child's spirit would never leave me, and it wanted me to be part of its eternal game. Since that day, I no longer know what is real and what is imaginary. All I know is that I am no longer alone, and I will never be alone again. This was Nicholas' story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe for more chilling tales. Have a horror story of your own? Drop it in the comments below. Your story might just be the next one we share.